and welcome to this session on exploring teacher-students' readiness on education for sustainable development, global citizenship education, and political learning. My name is Philipp Menna. I'm a student of educational sciences at the Julius-Maximilians-University in Würzburg, Germany, writing my bachelor thesis on how Politics for Future supports motivation, skills, and opportunities on ESD and GCED, an international comparative study. The outline for this presentation includes 5 topics, starting with an introduction, information on Politics for Future training course, current state of research, and the underlying theory and study design. In my second point, I will elaborate on the learning dimensions of ESD and GCED and give an interpretation of our first hypothesis. Then I will try to connect ESD and GCED to political learning and give you the interpretation of our second hypothesis. Topic number 4. We'll show you some ideas how to integrate previous described dimensions into teaching. And finally, this presentation will conclude with results of our students' readiness to teach ESD and GCED, interpreting our third hypothesis. So the Politics for Future project, where this study focused on, is an online training course for teacher trainees developed within the UNESCO Unity network to foster skills on education for sustainable development, global citizenship education, and political learning. The project started this year with a pilot course between February and May, and is considered to be repeated annually, open to future participation. Students in the pilot phase came from 5 countries, including Canada, Costa Rica, Germany, Greece, and South Africa. This research is based on a global survey by UNESCO and Education International in 2021 called Teachers Have Their Say, where about 58,000 teachers in around 144 countries have been asked about their perceptions on how ready they feel to teach ESD and GCED. 4 thematic areas have been defined based on UNESCO's Delors report, such as climate change, education, and sustainable consumption and production for the ESD part, and human rights education, including gender equality, as well as cultural diversity and tolerance for the GCED part. The 4 areas were also categorized within 3 learning dimensions of cognitive, behavioral, and socio-emotional that were inspired by Sipos et al. Finally, the modeling of the foundations of integrated entrepreneurship policy by Lundström and Stevenson served as a model for teachers' readiness. In this model, readiness is at its best where all 3 categories of motivation, skills, and opportunities intersect, which means that the limitation of one category determines the overall level of readiness. So the study design for this study came along with a mixed methods approach, where Politics for Future students were involved in a questionnaire survey once before the course started and once after they completed. In addition to that, qualitative interviews had been conducted with curriculum developers of Politics for Future from Canada, Costa Rica, and Germany on opportunities to teach ESD and GCED within their education system, as well as interviews with 2 experts from UNESCO and UN on Sustainable Development Goal Target 4.7. 2 research questions are pursued. First, how Politics for Future supports students' readiness in terms of motivation and skills development. And second, what conditions affect students' readiness in terms of opportunities on a system level and beyond. Within that framework, 11 hypotheses have been constructed, whereas 3 of them will be presented in this session. So the sample of our questionnaire survey included 41 students in the pre-intervention phase with a response rate of 55% and 31 students in the post-intervention phase with a response rate of 41%. The pilot course also involved non-teacher trainees, comprising half the amount than the teacher trainees. All 5 countries were represented, made up by 1 guest student from the Philippines. For this study, UNESCO provided the original questionnaire from their 2021 survey and granted permission to adapt those questions from the context of in-service teachers to our context of pre-service students, as well as the permission to add and leave out specific questions. Within the adapted questionnaire, the 4 thematic areas of ESD and GCED were built in variables of 6 items on a 4-point Likert scale. You can find examples of those items here below. The results of the pre-intervention survey showed that 13 up to 25% of students were less familiar with topics of ESD and GCED, with the least familiarity in the area of sustainable consumption and production, which repeated equal results from UNESCO's survey. Point 1 and 2 on the Likert scale were summarized here for illustration. Around half of the students could explain the general issues, and around 1/3 were familiar with it and could explain it well. After Politics for Future, almost half of students could explain the general issue, and more than around 50% were familiar with it and could explain it well. The same items could also be categorized in the variables of the 3 learning dimensions, wherein students at the pre-intervention were most familiar with the socio-emotional and least familiar with the behavioral dimension. In comparison to that, we found significant increases in the post-intervention in all 3 dimensions as well. But how significant were these results at all? So to find this out, we tested our first hypothesis with a paired t-test. The constraints of metric scaled variables, standard distribution of the residues, as well as the minimum sample size by power analysis were given. The dependent samples t-test revealed a significant higher familiarity of students within all 4 thematic areas after the course intervention, whereas the largest effect was found in the area of sustainable consumption and production measured by coherence D. The same testing was conducted within the 3 learning dimensions, and also here we found significant differences in familiarity within all 3 dimensions, with the largest effect in the behavioral dimension with a coherence D of 0.81. So these findings suggest that Politics for Future supports students in teaching ESD and GCED within all 4 thematic areas, as well as within all 3 learning dimensions throughout the course intervention. As Politics for Future training aimed to connect ESD and GCED with a political learning, we added a politics dimension to our questionnaire, including 1 variable out of 4 items where we asked students how comfortable they feel to talk about politics in different spaces. In the results, students felt 50 to 70% comfortable talking about politics at the pre-intervention, most familiar with friends and family, and the value increased to around 65 up to 80% in the post-intervention. Again, these results were tested within our second hypothesis, revealing a significant increase within the dependent samples t-test that suggests that Politics for Future supports students in feeling comfortable to talk about politics. And as a result from the qualitative interviews, we wanted to find out more about the impact of a political culture of sustainability on political learning. Thus, we built a variable of recognizing a political culture out of 7 4-point Likert items, where you can find examples of the items here below. The results described by country show the value of recognition in percentage. As we couldn't find significant correlations from this variable to other aspects of ESD, GCED, and political learning, this might be a suggestion for future research, using or developing different scales to prove the following ideas we got from our expert interviews. That are, if students are more aware about sustainability issues, teachers would be willing to incorporate these elements in their teaching as well, using examples of activism like climate strikes that can serve as a recent entry point into discussion at school. Furthermore, social media has been considered as a strong push factor in terms of bringing unsustainable behaviors into public, a practice students are already very well aware of. Finally, there has always been an emphasis within ESD and GCED on collective actions to address sustainability challenges. Also, there is, of course, a huge difference in opportunities of activism and discussions at school between certain countries. But how can teachers be empowered to integrate these elements into their teaching? Within our interviews, we could identify certain key points on that. First of all, ESD should be considered as a lens, making things relevant and culturally appropriate. General values of ESD are applied in every single discipline, but teachers also need to take responsibility because curricula give much more opportunity than teachers might recognize. Therefore, we need to prove that ESD will help teachers structure their teaching in a meaningful way, working with disciplinary knowledge pitches to address key challenges like our mobility system or energy use. Finland's phenomenon-oriented approach was plurally mentioned as a perfect example on that. Now, for our conclusion of this presentation, we asked our students how ready they feel at all to teach the 4 areas of ESD and GCED and found a significant increase between the pre and post intervention. The results were tested as well with one variable integrating all 4 areas, and the dependent sample t-test revealed a significant higher value of students' readiness to teach ESD and GCED. Within a coherence D of 1.10, the effect size indicated an overall large effect, suggesting that Politics for Future supports students' overall readiness to teach education for sustainable development and global citizenship education. So thank you very much for your attention. In case you have any queries or suggestions on this presentation or study, feel free to get in contact. You're most welcome. Bye-bye.